Welcome, everyone. My name is Josh Masters, and I am the Executive Director of Bridge Builders International, a US-based mission organization that has been serving Latvia and the Baltics for nearly 30 years now. And I am here with pastor, author, painter, artist, and founder of Bridge Builders International. He now serves as our president emeritus, Charles David Kelley. Chuck, welcome.
Thanks, Josh. It's to be with you.
It's good to be with you. And you are in your library in um, Belomith.
Plymouth, Oregon. Yeah, this is my library.
And
And yeah,
and it's a close-up of your books because Natalie, who is the BBI president, and I came and raided your library and,
mhm,
and brought a whole bunch of books back to South Carolina, and
yeah.
they are now in the BBI library. So
Well, I love that very much. I think that the resources that have helped one generation should be available to help the next.
I love that. So we are meeting today, and we are going to do a series of videos together because Natalie, who's the president of BBI, and I both believe it is vitally important as we move forward with the vision of the future of Bridge Builders International to not only honor, but document and record the history of Bridge Builders International and the last 30 years. So you and I'm so honored and grateful that you and I will get to have a series of conversations on video, and you'll tell us your recollections. And one of the ideas of this came because we were sitting in the new BBI office and we were praying to bless the new office. And you told us a story about when you were first naming Bridge Builders, and none of us had ever heard that story. And we were like, oh, we got to record some of these stories. So today we're going to talk about Bridge Builders International and where that name came from, and why it continues to be the name of BBI.
Mhm.
So, tell me, Chuck, about that fateful morning in the restaurant. Now, you at the time were the pastor at Corvallis First Baptist, is that right?
Yes, I was.
And you would go to this restaurant on Sunday mornings to go over your notes.
That's right. I had a pattern of getting up very early every Sunday morning. Took my Bible, my sermon notes, and I wanted to eat a power breakfast. And so I could be at the church by 7. So I would be at this coffee shop called Lions, and I would be there by 5 o'clock in the morning. And that Sunday morning, which was September 25th, 1994, I was working through a series on Hebrews chapter 11, which is the faith chapter. And that morning, I was going to speak on Jericho and Joshua's leadership of leading the children of Israel around Jericho once and then twice and then 7 times, and how the victory was won as Joshua heard God's voice and obeyed, even though it seemed like impossible or ridiculous.
Mm.
And as I was going over my notes and had my open Bible there and probably an omelet, there was an urging in my heart to start writing. And I started to write in the space of 20 minutes. There was a vision of a new calling, that I needed to step down from my 7 years at First Baptist Church and start something new that would focus on Latvia and that would build relationships between American churches and ministries and schools and those in Latvia. And I just started writing down the names of organizations I wanted to partner with. And I felt that God wanted us to partner with. And incidentally, I look back and see this is almost exactly what's happened. My document wasn't inerrant, but it's pretty accurate. And
Mm.
I didn't have a name, but it was bringing people together, building bridges, resourcing, bringing resources to the East, different things. But I just basically felt that the typical American church was Olympic caliber when compared to the typical church in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. We have so much, and we just don't see it. And the churches there had so little. And if we come alongside them and add our strengths to their strengths, and the lists of strengths were different. I even added that on my list, the strengths of the American church, strengths of the Latvian church, and put them together. And my goodness, we can really do something together.
Can you
And
give an
so,
example? Because even now that we continue the ministry in Latvia, I see that there is strength in the Latvian church that you don't see in the American church, and vice versa. Can you give an example of that morning and that list, like what you think the Latvian church was strong with that the American church wasn't, and vice versa?
well, I remember being so impressed with the Latvian church in the late 80s and the early 90s, how faithful they were and in their prayers, in their giving. They gave small amounts, but almost everyone gave.
Hmm.
In their faithfulness, I mean, they really participated. In their sense of reverence and their prayer. Um, in the worship services, in those years, people would come into the sanctuary and kneel, and then there would be another time of prayer. Everybody gets on their knees,
Mm.
and some people from the crowd would pray, and then there'd be another prayer. Everyone gets on their knees, and I was really deeply impressed with that. The pastors came in, they sat on their chairs on the platform, but they got on their knees first. When
Mm.
they served communion, the pastor and deacons, they would wash hands and just show the importance of being clean before God. Uh, those were things that impressed me very much. When scripture was read, everyone stood automatically. So that sense of reverence. And then we brought to the table sense of creativity and perhaps a bit more courage, a different kind of courage, because they had courage to survive. We had courage to maybe do new things.
Mm.
And we brought to the table innovation and all sorts of expertise, from preschool teachers to Sunday school to middle school, high school, college, seniors ministry, um, different things. They had music ministry, and some churches had as many as 7 choirs.
Mm.
And they were so good, better than ours. So, because in the Soviet years, churches couldn't have any specialty ministries, but they could have choirs. So they'd have 7 choirs, 4 choirs, and they were fantastic.
Mm.
Uh,
I want you to remember that note about the choirs being so great, because in our second video, we'll mention the children's choir from Matthew's church.
that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, and they're so good. Yeah,
I want to read something from your book, Charles. This is Surprised by the Father's Plan, with a foreword by Luis Palau and Thomas Kincaid. Um, and this is in the chapter that describes that time at the restaurant. You had prayed a prayer. And I remember the first time I read your book, Chuck, before I worked for BBI, before I was on the board of directors, just when I was starting to get involved through Celebrate Recovery. This actually is one of the lines that struck out to me in the entire book, is when you prayed this prayer. Lord, are you loosening our roots here, or do you want us to dig our heels in deeper, pray longer, and work harder? And it just strikes me that that's a prayer every Christian who is working for the kingdom should be praying. Are you calling us to tear up our roots and go somewhere else? But if we're going to stay here, are you calling us to dig in our heels deeper, pray longer, and work harder? And it seems to me that in that restaurant, that prayer began to be answered. So
yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'd like to say that for a couple of months, once a week, Nancy, my wife, and I would meet at the church in the sanctuary for our weekly prayer meeting.
Hmm.
And we were praying about many things, of course, but we're also wondering about that question: is that, before there's a major change, there are questions and just wonderings. I wonder what's happening here, and so we would pray, we would sing together. Sometimes she would be praying in a pew, and I'd just go to the piano and play worship music.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, so I think that September 25th, 1994 wouldn't have happened apart from the weekly prayer gatherings that she and I had together. We found that was more difficult to just pray at home because of all the distractions. So we had a weekly staff meeting and we focused on prayer. Now, when we were actually when I was actually at the restaurant and I began to write things down, there was no doubt in my mind that it's time to step down from my church. And it's time to no longer be afraid of having to raise money. I had majored in missions in college and seminary, and I had told myself and Nancy that I'll never want to raise money. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be thought of as a beggar, as a swindler, and all of those things. But God took away the fear of raising money. And
Those sound similar to the things I said to you when we were talking about me coming on board as a missionary.
yeah, it's normal. I mean,
Normal fear.
who who wants to appear not to be self-sufficient?
Hmm.
You know, and it's easy to say raising money is just asking people for their money, but really what it's doing is sharing a vision and asking people to partner with you so the vision can be accomplished.
Hmm.
And that's not scary to say that. So I wrote down this sense here. Um, I wrote down this new, fresh calling on a yellow legal pad, and then I went to the payphone. We didn't have mobile phones. I went to the payphone at 6:30 in the morning, and I called Nancy and woke her up. And I said, "Honey, it's time for us to leave, and we're going to start a new mission. And I really believe God's going to supply." And she was immediately receptive,
Hmm.
immediately positive about it as well. And
Do you
so I kind
feel
of
like
flew.
do you feel like God had been speaking to her as
Hmm,
well about it?
yeah, yeah. We've been walking on the same page,
Hmm.
and to mix the metaphor, but it's not a bad metaphor. We were on the same page and we were moving together with that. But she was surprised that at that kind of special revelation that took place at Lyons Restaurant that morning.
Yeah. Does that still exist?
It's now called Elmer's, and you've had breakfast there.
That's where we had breakfast.
Yes.
I didn't realize that was the same place. I wish I'd
Same
known that.
spot. I have breakfast there every Tuesday morning with men from my church. I've
Oh,
been going to Elmer's, which was Lyons, for 44 years.
that's amazing.
Mhm.
Now, so you leave the restaurant. God's given you this new vision for not only a ministry to Latvia, but a different type of ministry that's based
Yes.
on partnerships, right? So in one sense, and we'll talk about this in another video, but in one sense, following in your grandfather's footsteps, who was a missionary in Latvia,
Yes.
but also something new, right?
Yeah.
So then let's briefly talk about how the name came about for Bridge Builders International.
Well, if you're going to start something new and it's going to be an organization, um, you need wise counselors. You need board members. And I'll just say that before I made the final decision, I made it a point to speak to 42 different men and women who I trusted, and shared this story with them and asked for their confirmation, because the biblical principle is that there's wisdom in many counselors. And I figured this was such a big decision and such a big risk, because I had 4 little kids and I was making a pretty good salary at First Baptist Church. And this decision would put me in a position of having no guaranteed income, which is really scary. And so, um, uh, as I was talking to these people and getting their counsel, uh, all of them, except one person, affirmed in their heart this new direction. And some said it's about time, and others just said yes as well. And in that process, as people were responding and giving their advice, I began to see, oh, well, this person could be a board member. This person could be a board member. And so after the final decision was announced, which was 2 months later, in the morning service, I announced the decision. I went to about a dozen people and asked them to serve on the board, and most of them did. So we had a board meeting in our home around our dining room table. And this was in early December of 1994. We were just a concept. And we started talking about different names. And we thought about, well, is this a resource mission? We knew it was international. Do we want to use the word mission at all? Someone came up with the idea of bridges. Let's call ourselves Bridges and make that an acronym, like building relational, international, da 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 da. I forgot all of what that acronym stood for. And then we found out that Campus Crusade had a ministry in China called Bridges, and we didn't want to somehow cause any confusion. And then we had one of the wives of one of the board members, and who was a Latvian American. And this woman, dear woman, a woman of faith and prayer, and she said, "Well, we believe that God is with us." And of course, I think she said something about the Great Commission,
Mhm.
and what is the Great Commission here? The Great Commission is go into all the world, make disciples, baptizing them in my name, teaching them to observe. Joshie, what's the Great Commission?
You got it. And then to obey my commands, depending on the translation. And then Jesus says, surely I am with you until the end of the age.
Yeah, that's right. And so the point of her sharing her heart is that Jesus has promised to be with us. Let's call this organization With You. And I was kind of, with you? And one or two others said, yeah, that's interesting. Her dear husband said, well, dear, that's a little bit vague. But the
But
idea.
what is beautiful about it is that it represents that Jesus is with you.
Yeah,
He's with us in the mission, but
yeah.
also we're with you wherever we're going, right? It really speaks to partnership. So I think, nobody knew that story until recently when you sort of re-brought it up. I think that it will find its way into
Mhm.
our language somehow. I mean, certainly we will always be Bridge Builders International, but I think that will find its way into our language somehow.
With you. And what's wrong with that? That's I hope you're with me.
Mm,
I better not do this if you're not.
yeah.
Well, a week or two later, I was talking to a friend of mine named Jay Carty, who is one of my mentors and 14, 15 years older than me. And he was living in California at the time. And he was an evangelist and an author and just a dear, dear friend. So I called him and I told him about BBI. I asked his opinion on it, and he was really positive about it. And then he just said, "What are you going to call yourselves?" I said, "I'm not sure, but it has to do with something. It has to do with something about building bridges." And then it's like something clicked, and we both said simultaneously on the phone to each other, "Bridge Builders International."
Wow.
And I thought, what's wrong with that? And he said, "That's a great name." And that's what I took to the board. And on the 20th or 21st of December 1994, I took it to the Secretary of State in Oregon, and we registered as a 501c3 Christian charity.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
The rest is history.
And that was 30 years ago.
One of the concepts in my heart was to build 1,000 bridges in the next 10 years and see what happens when Christ walks over those bridges. Partnerships that we can't even dream about. And at the time, I saw partnerships as only institutional, like church or ministry organizations or schools. But since I began to recognize, partnerships had to do with people, because that's what those institutions are. They're people. And some people are members of those churches and those organizations, and some people have their own special talents and creativity and callings. And so when I discovered a few years later that we'd already had several thousand people get involved in partnerships, I knew that this dream I had written down in 94, that dream had been fulfilled and multiplied.
Mm. That is amazing. And that is a great place to stop. We're out of time for this episode. But Charles, we're going to continue to meet. We're going to continue to drink coffee from our Charles David Kelley painting mugs. And we're going to continue sharing these stories. And I'm so excited about it. For those of you who are watching, if you are interested in learning more about what Bridge Builders International is doing today, what we're doing now, then please visit our website, Bridge Builders INT, that's short for international, bridgebuildersint.com. And from there, you can find our Instagram and our Facebook and our YouTube. And Chuck, so thank you so much for joining us today. And we're going to see you again soon.
My joy.
God bless.
Bye.